Okay, this time I'm pretty sure this is going to work, Ed. We're on take 2. User operator error on take 1. So here we go. You want to talk to us today about suckback?
Yes, and it's an important topic to talk about it twice. So suckback is when you crash cool your beer and you start sucking in air into your fermenter, and that air is full of oxygen, of course, and it will go into your beer and you oxygenate your beer, or your beer gets oxygenized, which is not a good thing. You lose a lot of hop aroma initially and fairly quickly, and over time you will also get a staler beer. The malts will turn sweet and you get this typical old beer flavor, which we don't want. So as homebrewers, avoiding oxygen is very hard with the equipment most of us use, but we can try to reduce it. And one way is to make sure that you don't have the suckback happening with outside air. So we've seen a few videos online where people have constructed little bags that they fill with CO2 and attach them to their fermenters, and we feel that's a nice, easy way of doing it. And we thought, how can we create that thing with the products we have in the shop? So we have sourced bladders which look like this. They're normally used for filling beer when you want to serve beer through the hand pump. In this case, we're not going to do that. We're just going to fill it with CO2. They're pretty cheap. And the other part of it is up here. It's a fitting that we sell separately, but we've already attached it, which is a corny post-like fitting, which fits all the corny disconnects and makes it very easy to use. So once you get these two items together, all you need to do is fill it with CO2, and you can fill it with CO2 by either grabbing the CO2 that's coming out of your fermenter. I usually attach these bags when I dry hop, because when you dry hop you already have to open the fermenter anyway, and you usually do that towards the end of the fermentation. Fermentation has slowed down, not much CO2 is being produced anymore. It's a perfect time to avoid opening your fermenter more than you need. When you catch the CO2 from your fermenter, make sure that your yeast is not a big sulfur producer like lager yeast, etc. You might catch a lot of sulfur in these bags as well, and if you then crash cool and have the suckback out of this bag, you might introduce sulfur back in your beer, and you have too much sulfur in your beer, which usually is not a nice thing. What I do is, before I crash cool, I actually smell what's in the bag, which is fairly easy to do if you have one of these carbonation caps. They're great for pretty much everything kegging related. They fit liquid and gas disconnects, and what you can do is just have one of those gas to gas connectors, attach one to here, and attach one to your carbonation cap, which essentially opens up the bladder, and then you just squeeze the bag and just kind of smell it. You know, if it smells sulfury, maybe the best thing is to squeeze all the CO2 you've collected from your fermenter out and fill it with CO2 from your gas bottle.
So do you want to show us how you can fill that with CO2?
That's right. So gas bottles, especially for beginners, are quite a scary thing because you're handling potentially high pressures. However, 10 psi is not a lot of pressure, so you don't have to worry that in a second that bag will explode. Just make sure you don't have it set like at 30 psi or something, just because you just said quickly carbonated your beer or something. So what I do is I turn off I completely turn down the regulator and crank it up to 10 psi, and then I open it up, and this is actually pretty slow. I think this regulator shows a little bit less than it actually is. So you can slowly crank it up. You don't need to fill the bag fully. From my experience, you might need maybe a third, if at all, of that bag. There'll be plenty to replace the air in your fermenter when you crash cool. So
So that's a
probably about all you need.
So that's a 20-litre bladder there. So that's looking about half full. So we've got 10 litres of CO2 in there. And then how do you go about hooking that up to a fermenter?
Right, so multiple ways. Again, the main thing is you have the quick disconnect here, if you attach to this side, and then on the other side you can either have just some hose, ignore the fitting on this one. So on the other side you just have some hose that you can, in the cheapest way, stick into your top hat grommet if you use buckets, and that's it. It doesn't need to be a pressure-proof fitting. It's mainly about when your beer slowly contracts and sucks in outside air that you replace that with CO2, but it doesn't need to be pressure-proof at all. So just the top hat grommet will work, or if you have one of those brew buckets, the stainless ones, they come with these lids and they come with these little rubber bungs. They fit perfectly as well. If you want to go slightly fancy, that's what I've done at home. I use one of those bulkhead fittings. So they're essentially a corny post that you can screw into a hole and make a tight seal. I still use bucket at home for ease of use, and they fit perfectly in here. So you just screw it in. And I just bought a second lid, one that I don't use all the time, and I just keep this attached. Makes it easier to sanitize. And when you dry hop and replace your airlock with this bag, you just switch out the lids after you sanitize, of course, the second one, and that's like a 2-second job. You don't need to keep the fermenter open longer than you need. I suppose the second advantage of these bulkhead fittings is once you disconnect it, or if you carry it around, buckets actually do hold quite a bit of pressure. So when you carry beer around in a bucket, you always have a little bit of suck back just from the movement. With these, you don't get any air in with a good seal. So that's a little bit more expensive, the luxury version, but you definitely already made a huge progress by just using normal rubber bungs. So I think that's about it.
Cool.
Did I forget anything?
And of course, if you've got a more expensive fermenter, then there's a range of different options on how to attach that bladder to the fermenter so that you're sucking back in the CO2 rather than air.
Absolutely. So it's a very good way to reduce oxygen. When you then run into the keg, of course, you purge your keg with CO2, and there's many ways to reduce oxygen, and every little bit helps from my experience. And you might increase your hop aroma from going away in 3 days, worst case, to maybe 2-3 weeks. By that time, your keg's hopefully empty anyway.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time again.
Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.